Hey bud, how you doing?
Hey, how's it going?
I'm good. And hit the record button. There we go. Today we've got Kyle Peer with us, who's superintendent for Reynolds Homestead Forest Resources Research Center. And I'm not going to take up too much of his time. We'll have a few short announcements at the end on upcoming AREC events and such, but I'm going to turn it over to Kyle. Thank you very much, Kyle, for taking the time to join us today and talk more about your station.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Glad you all joined me on your lunch break. So I am Kyle Peer. I'm the superintendent of the Reynolds Homestead Forest Resources Research Center. I am with the College of Natural Resources and Environment at the Agricultural Research and Extension Center. So a lot of long words there. So I am the superintendent here. We have a full-time staff of three. Clay Sawyers is our farm manager, and Debbie Bird has multiple roles. Primarily, she's our greenhouse manager. She also have all our AA duties, and she's the assistant research manager. So she does a lot of different things. Um, so to start off with, you certainly can't talk about the Reynolds Homestead without talking about our history. So before we were the Reynolds Homestead, in the 1800s, this was a very active tobacco farm known as the Rock Spring Plantation, owned by Hardin Reynolds. And at that time, it encompassed 5,000 acres total, and those acres were mostly in Patrick County, but they crossed the border down into North Carolina, down into Surrey County. It was a tobacco farm, and at one time there were up to 100 slaves actively living and working on the farm. Uh, so picture there is the historic home that was built in 1843. Um, so that home in 1843 was built by Hardin Reynolds. In addition to the sorry, the brick house, we also have the original brick kitchen. We have the milk house. We have the ice house, the granary, the family cemetery, and the cemetery of slaves and descendants. And we are a registered state and national landmark. We are also a Commonwealth campus, and we also house the Community Engagement Center, which is administered out of the College of Outreach and International Affairs, and they're the ones that maintain the museum house and grounds in that area. And also note that we are the um, home of R.J. Reynolds. R.J. Reynolds was one of 16 children that Hardin had. Eight of them lived to adulthood. And if you recognize the R.J. Reynolds name, that is R.J. Reynolds Tobacco, now based out of Winston-Salem, Virginia. Well, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, sorry. So that is the site history. So what we're going to primarily be focusing on today is the AREC. This is the Forestry Education Center. So it does show up on my screen there. Okay, so this is the Reynolds Homestead Forestry Resources Research Center. You can kind of see off here to the right, this is our main building. And so I am a resident here. My family and I live here, so we live in this part of the house. Could someone give a thumb? I don't have a thumbs up. If someone could see, it's on screen here. The right side of the house is the residence for me and my family. This section of the house is housing for students and visiting faculty. And down in the basement is where our offices are. And we have an older greenhouse here. This is a storage area and wood stove that actually heats the entire building in the winter. This is our cold frame. And then this is our newer greenhouse that we were able to build. So that's kind of the layout of the land. Um, so the history of how we came about. So up until 1969, we were still the Rock Spring Plantation. And at that time, Nancy Susan Reynolds, the granddaughter of RJ, was the owner of the property. And at that time in 69, it was really in severe disrepair. The house was falling down, the grounds weren't maintained. And she knew if she didn't do anything, it would quickly be reclaimed, pretty much by the environment. So she decided she wanted to do two things. She wanted to create a forestry research center. For some reason, she was into forestry. And she also wanted to create a community engagement center to offer low-cost art and history programming to Patrick County and the surrounding area. So she donated the land, which at that time was down to 700, a little over 700 acres, to Virginia Tech. And Virginia Tech agreed to accept the property if she also put some money in an endowment that we could be used for maintenance and for programming. And she did that also. So we were officially created in 1969. We became the Reynolds Homestead Forest Resources Research Center. And then a little bit afterwards, the Community Engagement Center was built. So our primary duties are to look at all aspects of forestry. It could be forest health, productivity, fertilization, physiology, genetics, and I also have an appointment in Christmas tree research. So I'm a Christmas tree extension specialist for the state of Virginia. We are unique in the aspect that we are the only research station that is administered through the College of Natural Resources, where everybody else is administered directly through CALS. And so that kind of makes it a little different than some of the other places. So here we are on the map, and you know the map of Virginia. Of course, the big star is the mothership, Virginia Tech, and we are down here about an hour and a half due south in Patrick County. So our mission is like the standard mission of most of the ARECs. We weave together research, teaching, and extension, and work with collaborators, and then try to distribute that research results to the public. And this is kind of a diagram because people always ask where the money comes from and how are we affiliated. So we're kind of here in the center. And I've already mentioned the CEC, that's the Community Engagement Center. And they're out of the College of Outreach and International Affairs. And so we work together. They have a really nice facility that we can do programs with. When they put on a program talking about natural resources, of course, I go over there and act as a speaker or do a field tour. No funding actually goes between us. So they have a separate budget, they have a separate staff, and so our two budgets are separate. As you start working down through here, most of the ARECs, the funding either comes through CALS, VC, or combination and runs directly to the research station. For us, it makes one more stop along the way, and actually the funding goes to the College of Natural Resources and Environment and then comes to us. Sometimes it does come directly from the AREC system, but most of the funding and certainly the salary lines run through the College of Natural Resources. And so we do receive a little bit of funding through the AREC system, a little bit of funding from the College of Natural Resources. But a lot of the funding that we do comes from this bubble over here, which is our industrial affiliates. Our two primary funding sources right now are Corteva Agriscience, and our second one is the Productivity Co-op. And I'll kind of go into what we do with them and how that works. What also makes us unique is this advisory board bubble that you see up here on the top left. And if you've been following these presentations, you'll notice the advisory boards at most of the ARECs kind of follow the commodity of that area. So it could be the peanut board or the small fruits association, whatever it is. They're the folks that sit on the advisory board and kind of guide the research and direction of the station. But for us, our advisory board is actually made up of several different folks. When the Reynolds family donated the land, they did not just donate it and walk away. So there's two different parts of the Reynolds family. I've already mentioned the tobacco side, R.J. Reynolds, but R.J. Reynolds' nephew, Richard S. Reynolds, actually initially started a company making the foil that wrapped around the cigarette packs. And that company became Reynolds Metals, which is down in Richmond. And so you may, if you do Reynolds aluminum wrap, a Reynolds wrap, that's that company. So in addition to that, we also have folks on our advisory board, which is the descendants from the slaves that worked on the property. And then we also have influence from local government, Rotary Club, Board of Supervisors, the Education Department, all those things sit on our advisory board. We meet twice a year and we give an update of what we've done in the last 6 months to make sure we're following the vision of Nancy Susan Reynolds, and we're meeting our mission, not just the forestry, but we're also making sure we're providing programming for Patrick County and surrounding areas. So it's a little different setup from some of the other ARECs. And again, we do receive a little bit of funding from the foundation, but it's not nearly as much as people think. When you see the endowment, you say, wow, that's a huge endowment. But if you know how endowments work, you get a very small fraction. There's a formula that they use to figure it out. You actually get a very small fraction of the endowment, so that the endowment essentially will last forever. So that kind of sets us apart from a lot of the other ARECs. So here's an overhead picture, and so you can kind of see on the right side here is the homestead, the research station. You can see the picture of the historic home, and now you can see the kind of the ice house and the kitchen. And then the gray building there, that is the continuing education center. And where you see that road kind of loop around the outside. So they maintain a 7-acre piece inside the 780 acres. And so that's kind of their responsibility with landscaping maintenance and building maintenance and things like that. And then the remaining 700 plus acres is responsibility of the research station. So kind of here's an overhead view. You can see the buildings kind of there in the middle. And you can see we have some diverse cover types. So you see the dark green areas there. That's either loblolly pine or shortleaf pine. There might be some Virginia pine. There might be some white pine in there, but primarily it's either loblolly or shortleaf. The brown areas you see are hardwoods, and we're in the standard oak hickory mix. There's probably some tulip poplar, some maple, and there might be some different species down along the streams. But so it's about a 50-50 mix, a little more hardwood than pine, but that's kind of the ratio that we like to maintain. So I mentioned here the basic infrastructure. We have three full-time employees, total of 773 acres. I mentioned it was originally 700 acres, but we were able to buy a couple adjoining parcels and add them to our acreage. They're not making any more land, so anytime something becomes available next to us, I inquire to see if we can get it for a good price, and then we try to figure out a way to purchase that if we can. So again, 7 acres dedicated to continuing education center. And then I already mentioned the housing. I live here, and we have the greenhouses and of course the tractor shed and all the equipment and tractors that kind of go along with that. So what do we do every day? Well, as you can imagine, and when you have something as large as us, maintenance takes up a large portion of our time. Just in bush hogging, if you've had the winter that we've had ice storms, we've had high winds, and so just the general cleanup alone, maintaining the grounds, the buildings takes a lot of time. When you have 3 tractors, you're always seem to be working on one of them, so that's why we have the farm manager, and that's kind of his primary responsibilities, along with some research activities, is trying to maintain all this equipment and acreage. Second thing we do is forest and wildlife management. We have a active timber management plan. So we'll look a little bit about that. Of course, the bullet that you're all interested in today is the forest research, and then there's the extension piece that we all work with. So another kind of difference is our field days are a little. It's not one specific day. And not a lot of research stations do go out and have all their faculty there on site talking about the different plots, where we kind of break it up, and I do classes throughout the year for different folks. We're going to have the Sharp Logger class here on next Wednesday, Thursday. I did class with the Master Naturalists, the Master Gardeners do their training here. We do bus tours for the forest landowners. And then we do a lot of stuff with different forest education groups, different classes, different school kids, and I have kind of pictures of all this stuff. And then, of course, I travel. I do pesticide certification classes. I do class on invasive species, streamside trees in classrooms. And again, I'm the Christmas tree extension specialist for the state of Virginia. So I could do work in Virginia. And even last week, I went out to Kentucky and did a full-day program for the Kentucky Extension Agency. So So forest management, it could be anything from marking future timber sales. We do harvest our own timber. So we're just like a timber owner like anybody else. We mark off a block of timber. We put it out for bid. We accept the bid, and then a logging contractor comes in and harvests the timber for us. We don't harvest our own timber. We always hire that out. And a lot of times we're doing that, trying to work on future research sites. 800 acres or 700, whatever it is, sounds like a lot, but when you're talking about forestry research, where a research project can take up to 30 years, it doesn't take too long to fill up all your land. So you really have to be aware of what's needed, what's next, and when a study's ready to be harvested, we harvest it. So here's some pictures. This was just a white pine thinning we put in. So this is just all part of our forest management. So here's a site that we were preparing. It was a site of white pine, and it was pitch lob hybrid crosses and some Virginia pine. It was about a 50-acre site. So we needed it for the Region Y20 project, which we're going to talk about here coming up in a little bit. And so we came in again. We hired a contractor. We got it harvested. We hired a helicopter to come in and do a site prep spray to knock down the hardwood competition that was coming back in. And here you're seeing a bulldozer putting in a fire line so we can do a burn and burn the site and get it prepared for the next round of planting. We also just do prescribed burns. We just maintain sites with fire, either for wildlife or just for species diversity, or sometimes we use it for site prep. And so we do, our farm manager is also a certified burn manager. He previously worked for the Department of Forestry, so he has those skills. And we were able to acquire a retired Department of Forestry firefighting bulldozer. So we have that on site all the time. We were a kind of emergency backup dozer for the Department of Forestry. But we have that on site all the time, and we use it for our road building, road construction. And when we do prescribed burns, it's on site, putting in the fire line. So that's a nice piece of equipment for us to have. So we're doing some of our just our road maintenance. And this is a time when we can integrate things that we need to do in our forest management plan with research. So we had two graduate students on site, two PhD students looking at forestry alternatives for crossing streams. And so we had some culverts, we built a bridge, and we did a ford, and we collected all the data. They installed a big overhead irrigation system, and we kind of made it rain, and then we were able to monitor how much sediment was going into the creek as we did different parts of the crossing operations. All right, so forestry research is the next piece. So essentially, we're here to assist faculty and graduate students with projects. And this can mean anything. We could be growing planting stock for them. We could be doing preparing and maintaining the field sites. We can do some measuring and monitoring. We can keep their equipment going, or they can use our equipment, or we can use a tractor to help them install. So really anything the faculty and graduate student need, we're here to assist. We don't have any full-time faculty on site, so we're generally doing our researches for folks that come to us. We don't have a full-time person on site for that. The main thing I want to make sure is that they always call me before they write the grant. So the earlier a researcher can get me the information of kind of what they're looking for, the better it is for everyone. Because we have really good numbers on what things cost and how long things take. So especially if you're growing plants and you want to plan a research site, we have really good numbers on what that's going to take and what you should put in the grant. Also, then we're in the forefront of saying, okay, well, if you're going to do this for your research study, you probably need some training in this, whether it be getting pesticide certified or taking a tractor safety course, all those things. So the earlier that you can contact us, the better for sure. And so here's kind of a good example. I've just got a couple of slides here. So this is what we like to see. So this is a silviculture professor at Virginia Tech. He's since moved on, but we rehired that position. This is what I get in an email. It's like, hey Kyle, I got an idea for a spacing study in loblolly pine. Um, I'm thinking I want it to look like this. It's about 8 acres. Can we do it? And that's fine. This is all the information we generally need to get started. So here's the design that was sent to me. And so we started to think about it and we said, okay, well, looking at our management plan, do we have an area that can fit this site? And we did have a loblolly stand that was scheduled to be harvested. So we looked at it and said, well, this will probably fit in there. So we did some ground true thing and said, yeah, this will work. And so we started the process. We laid out the block. We put it out for bid. Logging companies came in, they bid on the site. We picked the best one that we thought would work for us. We sold the timber. They came in, harvested the timber. We did the site prep spray. We did the control burns, and then within 3 years, this picture went from this on the ground. So this is from an email to um, getting the grant proposal out there, getting the funding in place, and getting it in the ground. And so luckily, this looks remarkably like this picture. So every one of those dots you see actually is a GPS tree down to 6 inches. So this was planted last year. So we usually don't do any measurements in the first year because the trees are just kind of adapting to the site. And so we'll start measuring height and diameter and all the other parts of that starting at the end of this growing season. So that's kind of a good example of someone has an idea, that we figure out what it costs, they get the grant funding in, we get it in the ground, and then we get reimbursed essentially for our part of the work. And then from here on out, we'll do some work in there as needed. But generally from here, it's kind of left to the graduate student or the researcher that put the project in to collect the data and certainly do the writing and publishing. That's their responsibility, not ours. All right, so here's another project. This is a little bit more advanced. So this is funded and installed by the Productivity Co-op. So the Productivity Co-op has a bunch of members in forest industry. It has several co-directors. We have a co-director at Virginia Tech. There's a co-director at NC State. There's a co-director in Brazil, and there's a co-director in Chile. And generally, it's the purpose of the Productivity Co-op. It's industry funded, is ways to make loblolly pine grow faster. Loblolly pine is a dominant forestry species of the South. It grows from Virginia all the way down to Florida, over to Texas. And if you have driven to Florida on 95 and you're kind of stuck in traffic on, South Carolina line, and look left and right, and it's loblolly pine. It is the dominant forestry species of the South. It's used for lumber. It's used for paper. It's used for biomass. It's the king of the South. And this is kind of a slide of what forestry research has done for the growth rates of loblolly pine over time. And so looking at 1940, 1940 was just loblolly pine growing in its natural stance. And then it was producing 1,500 cubic feet per acre. And then we started to manipulate the species almost like you would do in corn or soybeans. First thing we did, we started planting it instead of letting it come out of its own. We got some gains. Then somewhere around 1960, we started to introduce things like site prep, where we would go into a site before we planted, we do something to the ground, whether it be maybe bedding and that's just making mounds to grow the trees on, or something of that nature is scarifying. And we started to introduce tree improvement. And tree improvement is, again, just like corn or soybeans. What you're doing is you're going out, finding the two best parents, the ones that are the straightest, the most disease resistant, to produce the most volume, and you're crossing them together and you're getting the offspring from those and then replanting those. And then so on and so on through multiple generations, you continue to get gains in growth and yield and things like that. So that started somewhere around the 1960s, and that continues on through today. Um, so there, if you go through the South, you will find seed orchards that are specifically grown just to produce seed, to produce seedlings with these genetic improvements. Um, Somewhere in the 70s, we started to introduce fertilization, where we started to look at all over the South, looking at soils and what was missing in those soils to help produce loblolly pine. So whether it be, is it missing phosphorus? Is it missing nitrogen? Is it missing boron? Something like that. So looking at all the soils, finding out what they needed, putting those additions in, whether it be on the ground or helicopter-based fertilization, and you can see it makes pretty dramatic improvements in the amount of volume you can get on any given acre of land. Then we started to look at weed control. So if you control the competition, if you take everything out of the stand that's not a loblolly pine, all the resources, the light, the water, the nutrients will be focused on your crop trees, the loblolly pine. So we've made some pretty good advances in weed control. And then the final thing is biotech and clonal. This is where we start looking at clones themselves instead of taking the parents and using all the seeds that are produced. You find that one specific seed that's really a winner, and you mass produce that one seed and you plant that. And so that's where you get these pretty large dramatic gains. I wish I had the graph for 2020, but I have to start searching around and see if there's a new bar to add to see what kind of gains we're getting now. But so that's generally why the region-wide why the productivity co-op does this work, and why we have one of their sites here. So in addition to that, let's go back to actually one slide. So if you look at the last, oh, we're going the wrong way. If you look at that last bar in 2010, take that bar and then move it over to here. And that would be the US bar. So something interesting about loblolly pine, of all the great gains that we've gotten here in the US, if you take that species and you take it out of its native range and you go, especially go down to South America and you plant it in Argentina and Brazil and Chile, you start to see these dramatic gains in growth. And we just don't know why. We don't know why the trees are growing better in South America than here in the US. And so we created, well, Dr. Tom Fox in 2005 put together the region-wide 20 to look specifically at why these trees grow so well in South America as compared to the US. And so we did our hypothesis testing. And the one thing we were able to eliminate right off the bat was genetic differences, because by using clones, you get rid of that variability within the seedlings themselves. Because somebody say, well, they grew better down there because the seed source was different. So we use clones to try to eliminate that problem. So the trees that they're growing there are the exact same trees that we're growing here. And so then we started to do a list of all things it could be. Is it light? Is it weather? Is it foliage? Like what is making the trees different down there? And can we replicate that here in the United States? So whatever's happening down there to make them grow faster, if we can figure out what it is, then can we do that here in the United States so we get those equal growth rates? So this is the major part of the RW20. So here's our study location. So you see GPS. So we installed the study in 3 different locations. The first one here is obviously at the Reynolds Homestead in Virginia, which is the far reaches of where loblolly pine can grow. The second little tree you see up there in the United States is Bladen Lakes, North Carolina. That's kind of the heart of loblolly pine country. So that's where you expect it to grow the best in the United States. And then the third research place is down in Brazil. If you notice, when we're talking about Brazil, we're not talking about Amazon Brazil. That's the dark part of Brazil if you're seeing the map down there. This is more southern Brazil, where the climate actually matches what you would find here in Virginia, North Carolina. So we're talking southern Brazil when I'm showing you those graphs. So here's our research study design. So the site was 52 acres. We used 32 acres for the research study. We have different levels of silviculture. 0 is low, and 1 is high. All that means is for the low silviculture, we planted the trees and we didn't do any initial additional herbicide treatments and fertilization after the planting was done. So just kind of like how an operational stand would be. You would kind of put them in the ground, do all your work ahead of time, plant the trees. You may come back and fertilize later, but more than likely you're going to wait the 25 to 30 year rotation, come back in and harvest the trees. So the second part of that was the high silviculture treatment, where we made sure that there was nothing else growing in that stand other than the loblolly that we planted. And then we gave them all the food that they wanted. So we fertilized and fertilized and fertilized. So they were not looking for any, they had all the nutrition that they needed to grow. So it would not be a limiting factor on their growth. We also did 3 different densities. We planted trees at 250, 500, and 750 trees per acre. And then our genetics, like I mentioned before, we use clones. So we use 4 different clones, and then we use the parents of those clones. One's a mass pollinated, and one is where we knew the mother. And again, this site is replicated here at the Reynolds Homestead, in Bladen Lakes, North Carolina, and down in Brazil. And so here's kind of a close-up of one of our research blocks. So we did 8 replications per site. And the research blocks are 9 by 9, but we only measure the center 25. So we only measure the center 25 trees because we want the trees that we're measuring to be competing with themselves. That way it kind of gets rid of any errors if they're fighting against trees that are taller and bigger next to them. So when you zoom in on this, you can kind of see the difference between the different, you can see the tight spacing is the 750 trees per acre, the average spacing, which is what we normally plant in Virginia. In Virginia, you're normally planting loblolly pine at 500 trees per acre. And then you can see that wider spacing, that 250 trees per acre. And so again, this was planted in 2009, and we've been collecting data ever since. And sure enough, our graphs show exactly what we already knew. The trees in Brazil kick butt. There's no other way around it. So this is essentially the same graph. One we're just looking at volume, and one we're looking at basal area, which is how foresters measure trees a lot of times. But you can see, so the green graph there is Virginia, and we're doing pretty well. We're kind of keeping pace with North Carolina. And then the blue bar is Brazil, and the Brazil trees are just they're just growing. It's pretty spectacular. So now we started to go in and we started to go back to our hypothesis and say, okay, why? And so the first thing we're going to look at is light and foliage. And so we said, well, maybe the needles are doing something down there, or the light is different. Even though it is about the same distance from the equator, just on the opposite, it's in the southern instead of the north, maybe the light's different, or maybe the needles themselves are being more efficient. And so we built towers in all the locations. So we were able to get these from the Forest Service. So we put 8 towers up in there. And the reason we wanted the towers, so as the trees grew, we could have direct access to the needles themselves. We could measure directly at the needle. So we have 8 towers built, and we did all our research looking at light use efficiency and active radiation and how the needles are in the canopy, the size of the canopy, the live crown, and none of it proved anything. None of it said that was the reason the trees in Brazil grew better than ours. And so we crossed that off the list after measuring. We said that's not the answer. That's not why they're doing better down there. So we were monitoring everything we can think of. Sap flow, you'll see these are little, they look kind of, but they're underneath those little tinfoil things. The tinfoil things just protect them. Are the little sensors that are embedded in the trees that are measuring sap flow. The things you'll see on the ground here with the little tubes, we're measuring CO2 efflux out of the ground, or the amount of respiration that's happening at the roots. Trying to see if that's the differences. And none of that was the difference. So another thing we were looking at is, oh, no, sorry, one more slide in there. So this is how we're monitoring now. So in the past we had this giant equipment that would send signals out and stuff like that, and now all of that work can be done with these little Atmos data loggers, and they're pretty much cell phones permanently mounted on sticks. And I had to go around after I installed these and put cages around them because a bear cannot walk by one of these without just messing with it. I don't know why. I don't know if it's the shape or the color, but or they're just always interested. So we had to make sure they had cages around them so they all didn't get destroyed by the because they're $1,500 a piece or whatever they are. So it's kind of bummer when you come up and they're chewed to bits. So another thing we looked at was biomass. And we're thinking, well, maybe since the needles are all doing the same thing and it's not weather and the needles are producing the same amount, maybe it's how the trees are allocating the resources. So they're getting the same amount of resources. Maybe the trees in Virginia and North Carolina are allocating those resources to roots. But the ones in Brazil, they're just saying, well, our roots are really efficient for some reason, and we're going to allocate the resources to all the above ground. So that's why you're seeing that more above ground biomass. And so we did whole tree harvest in 2017, and we repeated the process in 2022. So we measured everything. We took every single needle, every single branch, um, measured where they come from, put them in the drying oven, seeing what they weighed. And again, everything you see is always done in the 3 locations. And then we did the below ground. We came in with excavators and marked out very specific meters of the ground, did all the underground harvesting, sent them to the drying lab at the Forest Service down in Raleigh. And those pits that you see on the side, every single piece of earth was sifted, and every root a millimeter or larger was saved and weighed. So quite an undertaking. We spent nearly the whole winter in the woods sifting. And in addition to that, we did a lot of cores to try to see what the fine roots were doing a little farther away from the tree. And we put all this data together and oh, sorry, there's one more core picture. And so here's kind of just a general, this is the data. So what it shows is we were completely wrong. In fact, if you look at these graphs kind of carefully, all the foliage was about the same. The stems, the foliage, the branches, not significant differences between the 3 sites. But in fact, the Brazil site was making a huge amount of coarse roots and fine roots per living around, directly opposite of what we thought might be happening. So that was really a surprise. If you look at the graphs, the trees in Virginia, 10% of their total biomass is coarse roots. In North Carolina, it's 11%. In Brazil, it's 23%. So they are allocating a lot of resources below ground. So unfortunately, that is not the answer either. But what it does do for us is we can say, well, the trees in Brazil are really good at storing carbon below ground. And we know from other studies that this carbon will persist through more than one generation. So if we grow loblolly pine in Brazil and South America, it will store a lot of carbon below ground for a long period of time. So that is good news. And so that's the paper that we put together that's hopefully going to get published. It's in review right now. So unfortunately, we've done all this work and we still don't know the answer. So, but I have some ideas and I'll go to that at the end. So we're going to skip to another study and then we'll kind of come back to that at the end. So this is a little different. So this is working with Dr. Jason Holliday at Virginia Tech. And this particular project is looking at using hybrid zones to try to get a little better understanding of how trees will adapt to climate change over time. So hopefully you can see my arrow on here. So the green blob is the natural range of Populus trichocarpa. North of there, the species that predominates is balsam poplar, balsamum. In between those two, there's hybridization going on. So near the coast is Trichocarpa. In the more boreal, it's the balsam poplar, and then in between, it's kind of a species mix. Um, so by using these species, we can kind of get an idea of what might happen to trees over time as they adapt. So what they did was they went out to the northwest, and they started at the coast where the Trichocarpa was predominant, and they start transects, and they would go north and east, go through the natural range of Trichocarpa and travel into the range of the balsamifera. So they did transects, and as they were doing these transects along the way, they were taking cuttings and putting them in coolers, and at the end of the day, they would end up in a FedEx box and be shipped to the Reynolds homestead. So they quite expensive. So as the transects were done, the trees were shipped overnight to us, and we would store them in the cooler. So what they were trying to get as many different samples from the Trichocarpa range and get the full genetic picture, and then also capture the genetic variability of the balsam poplar, and then the hybridization that occurs in between. So you can imagine walking, collecting material, driving, collecting material as you lay transects out through Alaska, through the British Columbia, and through the Pacific Northwest. So once that material was collected, it was sent to us. I'm trying to advance my slide. There it goes. So in all, we rooted 9,000 cuttings. So we would get them in, we would sort them, we would process them, and the variation in the cuttings was pretty dramatic. And so you can imagine the cuttings that we would get by the coast, where it's more temperate. They did beautiful cuttings with large buds and big nodes. And then as we went up, they went up through the mountains and through the hybridization and over to the balsam side, the cuttings would come in, and in 1 10-centimeter cuttings, you may see 10 years worth of growth. And so the cuttings themselves varied incredibly. So we would get them in our boxes, and we would root them 3,000 at a time. So that's what we could fit in our greenhouse. We would do complete random blocks in case there was a problem with a fungal outbreak or um, a, a nozzle that got clogged that we didn't catch or something like that, that we wouldn't lose the whole sample of that particular clone. So once they were rooted, they went out to the rooting benches, and then we grew them out. And oh, you mentioned that all of this was done during COVID, all of it. So there were a lot of restrictions on who was allowed to be here and how we were allowed to work. So it made a challenging project really challenging. So we grew the rooty cuttings out. We sorted them, and then we shipped them out. So the collaborators are on this project were Dr. Jason Holliday from Virginia Tech. There was also a collaborator from the University of Idaho, which is new now at North Dakota, sorry, and is now at Penn State, and collaborators from University of Vermont and UMass. So several collaborators on this project. So once we, at the end of the season, when we grew the cuttings out and had them rooted, sorted, randomized, those schools would send graduate students. Now, of course, this is during COVID. So the rules were the graduate students that drove these U-Haul trucks could not leave the vehicle. So they slept in the vehicle. When they got here, we converted one of our greenhouses to an apartment. We had a porta potty that they could stay in because they couldn't actually go inside our buildings. So they would show up, they would be in the greenhouse, and then we would load their materials. They would jump back in the trucks and drive. So one set of cuttings went to North Dakota, one went to Vermont. We kept one here at the research station, and then we sent 20 smaller sets to 20 arboretums throughout the country. And so they were planted here at the Reynolds Homestead in common gardens. And so the entire range of our genetics of both species are planted here. And then we started monitoring things like bud set, bud break. And by looking at the genome of these species in 3 different locations, and since you have the complete set of the genome, you can kind of see how they react to being grown in different environments. And this is where uh, this is more advanced than my abilities. This is the researchers, the collaborators, and their graduate students know how to interpret this data to try to see how these species may adapt to climate change, and in general, how trees themselves may adapt to climate change. Like, how are they going to adapt to the new environments that are being forced upon them? So that is, and if you need any further information, there's some published papers. You can contact Jason Holliday if you want to read the final reports on this. But this is most of the work here has been completed, and most of the work now is being done in the genetics labs of the collaborating institutions. All right. So the final thing I want to talk about is something more practical. This is our work with Corteva Agriscience, and we just generally call this the herbicide trials. And I know there's a lot of extension agents online and other folks in extension. Certainly anybody that works in extension knows what a label is. A label is on every herbicide, fungicide, and it tells you exactly what the chemical is, what it's used for, and it has rates. So this chemical, if you use this much of this chemical, you will kill this plant or something along those lines. And that type of work has to be done somewhere. And we do some of that work here. So we have a contract with Corteva Agriscience to grow the seedlings for them and create the research sites that they use to test their chemicals, so they can learn about their new chemicals and they can adjust the rates that are inside the label. So in this particular picture, you see, this picture was taken 2 days ago or yesterday. I can't remember. So anyway, we just started we do this annually. So in the front of this picture here with the red labels, that's red maple. The blue labels are southern red oak. The green labels in the back are sweet gum. We're also growing hickory and loblolly pine, and the species mix changes. The Corteva tells us which species they want to test next, and so we do the research on, and that's primarily Debbie's job as greenhouse manager. She did all the research on the stratification and the fungicide and what that particular species is going to need to grow. So we've done tulip poplar in the past, we've done locusts, we've done invasives like Siberian elm, and so whatever the new species that they want tested, we grow for them. So they start life here in the greenhouse until they germinate, because we need to start them now so they can grow a containerized seedling within a year. So we start them here. Soon after, about May 10th, we start looking at the weather, and if there's no threat of freeze, they go into a shade house for a little bit to get acclimated to UV, and then they spend their summer on the bench of the research station. So you can see you have red maple in the foreground. I think there's oak down there in dark green. I believe this is a picture. I believe that was Siberian elm, I believe, in this picture. So we grow them throughout the summertime. We top them a lot to make we want a really good shoot to root ratio where they have a really robust root system. So they sit on the benches till fall, and then they go into the cold frame until about January, and then they go into a cooler where we keep it at about 36 degrees, and we limit the light to about 8 hours a day. We're basically just trying to make sure they stay dormant. If we found that if we leave them in the cold frame, they actually break bud a little bit too early. So we try to slow them down a little bit by putting them in the cooler. So from there, they head out to the field. This was 2 weeks ago, planning the research site. So we plan an acre for them a year. That's what the contract states. It's about 500 or so of each species. We plant them 2 feet apart with a 4-foot row in between. And we came up with the spacing because that is the spacing that our DR field mower is. So pretty much our field mower decided the spacing that the trees were planted. So again, this is at time 0. This was 2 weeks ago. Here's the field. planted and ready to go. By the end of year 2, they're about this size. We go in. We do not want them to look like trees. We want them to look like hedges because that's what the researchers need for their experimental design. So we come in and we top them. We top the tops and we shear the sides. And by year 3, they form pretty nice hedge plants. And you can see the multiple species again with red maple on the right side there. And the elm is actually on the left, and there's a meter stick there to kind of show you how high we let them get. We do not let them get any higher than this. And so at the end of this season, Corteva AgriScience comes in and does their treatments. We do not know what the treatments are. The labels that are on the ground just have a number. All that stuff is proprietary for them. We just we do not know what it is. And then they come in and measure, monitor, and then usually once a year, the researchers in the Mississippi East essentially come to our site and they look at how the plants reacted to the different rates. And this has been an ongoing study, and uh, it's good for us because it provides money, which we always need, and I feel this is really just basic research that needs to be done, and we have the ability to do it, and we're good at it. And I think that the results are instantly distributed to landowners and forest managers and things like that. A lot of these chemicals, of course, are used on right of ways. So AEP wants this information, VDOT wants this information because these chemicals are used along roadways. So I feel it's really good practical information that we're providing. So what's coming in the future? So we're going to continue to work on the RW20 since we obviously have not figured it out yet. The next steps, we're going to start looking at soils, probably more specifically fungal interactions. There's been some recent research as those. There's a lot of stuff going on below the ground with mycorrhizae and there's a variety of species. Some are obviously helping the trees grow. Some are obviously impeding the trees grow, but we don't know what those species are and how they're interacting with the trees. And so we're going to look a lot closer about that. It could be a pathogen, it could be water. We just don't know. And we may never really find one specific silver bullet that says this is the reason. It could possibly be a combination of a variety of things. When you put them all together, you get that extra growth, almost like that original slide that I put in with all the different tree improvements. But we're going to keep working on it and hopefully figure it out. One of the other things that we have 2 projects coming along, looking at satellite data and drones with LiDARs to measure forest inventories. The good thing about the RW20 site is we have mapped every single one of those trees. We have GPSed them down to 6 inches. So we know exactly where they are, and we have all the growth data from 2009 to now. We know how tall they are, how fat they are, where their branches are, how many needles they have on them. So it's a really good environment to test drone applications and SIDAR applications because you have all the data. So if you fly over one of these trees and the drone knows exactly where it is, it knows exactly which tree it's looking at, and it can look at real-time data of what that tree is doing. And the last thing is I don't know what's coming. FREC is going through, that's Forest Resources and Environmental Conservation. That's the department that's in CNRE that looks at forestry. We have a lot of new faculty coming on board. We're kind of in a retirement phase. So those new faculty will kind of, drive on what happens here at the research station. So it's kind of an exciting time, really, to see when they bring in their expertise, where we're going to go next. Again, teaching is part of our thing. So here's the capstone student project. So the capstone is for forestry students in their senior year. They have to write a forestry management plan. So some of those students come here and we map out some areas and they go in and measure all the trees and they write a management plan for that block. Pretty much they say, here's the trees you have. This is the species you have. This is their value now. This is what they will be in X amount of time, and here is our recommendations on what you should do with that block. That's basically what a forest management plan is. It's based on the objectives of the landowner. And so we host those every year. They were here Sunday. They were here Tuesday. So they usually come down 2 or 3 visits. They can get all their measurements done, and then they write and then they present, and we sit as landowners and tell them how they did. And then the final piece, of course, is the extension piece. I mentioned I'm the Christmas tree extension specialist for Virginia. I work mostly with the choose and cut growers. So I travel around the state. I do workshops, especially for new growers. I do the pest management section, the pest management guide on Christmas trees, and pretty much handle any questions. So all your agents out there, if someone has a Christmas tree question, send it my way. So if someone calls you and says, what's happening in my farm? Why are my trees yellow? Go out there, meet with the landowner like you normally do. If you can't figure it out, take some good photos and then send that to me and we'll work through it together. And I may need to go to the disease clinic or the insect ID lab and help figure it out. But that's kind of the progression that we like to see. Leaf trail. So this was something I put here on the research station. And I think maybe some other research stations may have this issue too, is people see us more of a state park, especially us because we're open all the time. We have the museum here, so there are already people here. There's already people walking around. They say, well, why can't we go past the gates? And it's like, well, you can't because, there's graduate student projects back there with expensive equipment and people like to fiddle with things, right? So what we did was we put in an interpretive trail. It's a mile long. It has a kiosk. It has brochures. And so you can walk around and it has forestry information on there. It has historic information on there. So it kind of keeps people contained and it feels like they've seen the area without, intruding on any of the research that we have going on. And then here's the things you'll see along the way. Again, this place was the Rock Spring Plantation. This was the original spring that the family got water all the way up through the 60s. And so we have that down there to see. And of course, I do host a lot of groups. And the interesting thing about this picture here is this is actually the Region Y20 site after we did our site prep and lit it on fire. And this is a group called the Dan River Bases Association. I do other projects with them with kids. And this is the first time they showed up, and it's an environmental organization looking at stream water quality and things like that. And I take them immediately to a site that looks like the surface of the moon that's been lit on fire. And that's important because when you have groups, you don't just want to take them to like big mature trees, say, look, 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 this is forestry. I want them to show what forestry is, and then I can explain to them why we cut the site, why we sprayed it with herbicides, why we lit it on fire. And so I kind of, this was the stump that I was standing on. And this was in 2009. This group has come back every 2 years since 2009. And we go to this exact same spot. And now we walk through the forest. And it's like, so I told you it was going to grow back. And then we talk about the science and all the kind of slides that I showed you. We talk about it. So it's, this is how, this is what I consider my forestry field days. If a teacher calls, says, I want to bring my students out, I say yes. Anything we can do. And a lot of times we talk about trees, but a lot of times I'll use other things like we talk about the wildlife that use it, the insects that use it, the birds that use it. And that kind of gives a kind of a more holistic picture for the kids to see how forests are not just trees. It's everything. It's the insects, it's the soil, it's the water. So it kind of makes a more complete program. And it kind of keeps them interested. If you just talk about trees, their eyes kind of glass over. So so I like to include other things when I do my talks. Uh, Here's a planting trees. So again, you get a group of kids out there. And instead of me just sitting there planting trees, we have them grow the trees in the classroom, and then they come out and they actually plant the trees. So this is on Philpott Lake. I do some work with collaborators with, again, the Dan River Basin Association, the Army Corps of Engineers, Department of Forestry, Soil and Water. We all get together and the kids will come out for a full day. We've run about 600 to 800 kids a year through this program, thousands of kids since the beginning of the program. So if you're an extension, always try to find time to work with youth. So, I mean, that's the next generation. I mean, there are future extension agents, our future foresters, our natural resource agents. So the sooner you can get them involved and active and outside, the better for sure. And with that, I think I finished right on time, and hopefully no one asked me a hard question.
Thank you, Kyle. Well, we do have one hard question.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Came in the chat from Beth. So how do you handle invasive species on the station there?
Well, we do invasive species management. It's part of our forest management plan. And you have to choose where you can fight. We no longer fight autumn olive. We can't. We're overrun with it. We don't have the time or resources to fight autumn olive. What we do control is we've done a very good job of controlling a tree of heaven through basal treatments in the wintertime. And we work a lot on our Japanese stiltgrass. Japanese stiltgrass, it can quickly take over forests. It typically follows our stream beds and along our roadsides. It's fairly easy to kill because we can use low rates of glyphosate under half a percent will actually knock it back. But it has a very sturdy, I guess, seed bank. So you have to do it repeatedly. You'll come back and say, oh, it didn't work because you come back next year and you'll see the same stiltgrass there, but it's actually that's growing from the seed bank. So you have to go back repeatedly over and over again. And through this, we actually have reduced our Japanese stiltgrass. Um, some other things that we fight, privets and things like that is not too bad. And again, the autumn olive, we just don't have the resources or time. We do keep it out of certain areas, of course. Our areas we deem we need to keep it out of here. We can keep it out of there, but station wide, we have fields of it that we just can't do anything with. So I guess I would say it's a species by species basis. We do not have any ash left. We didn't have a lot of ash here anyway. It wasn't a predominant species in our forest, but what we did have, we lost. And now I use it for education. So we still have a few standing ash, and I went out and I cut the bark off, and I used that on all our field days and tours. We go by there and we talk about emerald ash borer, and so I use it for education. But all our ash trees are gone.
Okay.
And lanternfly is not here yet, but it will be.
Understood and agree. Any other questions from the group? I have one other question just from me. How do you do it all with 3 people?
Well, you never stop. Um, I get that email from Human Resources at the end of the year saying you haven't used up any of your time. You need to start using your time, and I say when, when. So we do what we can. We're busy. I think what helps us is everyone that's been here has been here 20 years or more. That's how we're efficient. We know exactly what needs to be done. We know what's coming, so nothing catches us off guard. If there were 3 people here that didn't have the experience we have, they would be buried because it just would be. We sometimes bring in extra help if we like that tree planting. We used to do that in-house. We hire that out now. We hire a landscaping company to help us. We're there with them, so we know it's getting done correctly. But yeah, so it's a struggle. It is a struggle. And one of the positions that we have is soft money. So there's always that we have to make money to keep that position going.
Absolutely. Understood.
Yeah.
Well, we've butted up against the end of the time. Kyle, thank you so much for presenting today. And for anyone who is interested in working with Kyle, please feel free to reach out to him. Thank you again.
Great.
We'll see everyone next month.
Thank you all.